Last week we left the prophet Elijah having just confronted King Ahab. Ahab was a king of Israel who had the responsibility to lead the nation to know God, but had rejected that responsibility, had married a woman from a foreign place that worshiped idols, and he himself actually adopted the worship of idols and was allowing Jezebel, his wife, to pursue the prophets of God and to try to stamp out the worship of the true God in Israel. Elijah, the prophet, the representative of God, stood up and confronted Ahab. He actually spoke a message of judgment on Ahab, his house, and on the nation of Israel for turning away from God. They were in the middle of a great drought. Ahab and his people were blaming Elijah for this drought. Elijah was making the point that it wasn't him, it was because they had rejected God that this judgment was coming upon them. And Elijah challenged Ahab to send prophets of the false god Baal to meet him on top of Mount Carmel. And that is where we're picking up today, 1 Kings chapter 18, beginning in verse 20. If the Lord is God, worship Him. That's the idea that we're exploring today. Chapter 18, beginning in verse 20. So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow Him. But if Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer him a word. We're introduced to the people as a whole, the people of Israel, as an indecisive group. They're lost. They don't know what direction that they need to go. They are seekers, hopeful seekers, trying to figure out what direction that they need to go, but they don't know. They're indecisive. Have you ever been at a meal, eating at a restaurant, and at the restaurant there may be 4, 6, 8 of you, and there you are sitting, and there's always that person at your table that, although they've had the menu for 20 minutes, has no idea what they want to eat. And the poor waiter or waitress comes up and says, "Can I take your order? Or do you need more time?" And you're like, "We don't need any more time. I'm starving. Let's order." And that person's like, "I don't know what I want." And I end with me. And then it goes around the table and you get to that person. And guess what? They still don't know what they want. And you know somebody, I know someone like that. I'm not going to mention a name, but I know at least one person like that. Being indecisive, not being able to flip the switch or pull the plug or whatever term you want to use. When faced with decisions, it is so hard to pick, because what if you pick the wrong one? You need more time. You need more information. That's where Israel was. But this was about something far more important than what they were going to order at a restaurant. This was a decision that actually had eternal consequences. Where are you going to put all of your confidence? Who is your God? Because the fact is, all of us have a God. It's just a question of who that God is. Is it yourself? Is it something you're pursuing? Is it a separate belief system, or is it the real God? But all of us, in that slot in our lives, there is something in the God slot. Even people that say, "I don't believe in God." Well, guess what? You fill that slot, because you just made a declaration about whether or not there's a God. So whether you admit it or not, there's a slot in our minds, in our view of reality, for God. And everybody's got to fill that slot with something. And who you put in that slot is the most important question to have an answer to. And that's where these people were. They didn't know who they wanted to put their confidence in. A few years back, I was working with a guy. We were baling hay back in the hay wagon, and in between the bales getting kicked back and dodging them and stacking them, we were having a really in-depth conversation. He was talking about hunting and about his last outing, and I was talking a little bit about, such and such a thing happened. He paused and looked at me and said, I didn't know y'all could hunt." By y'all, he meant people that worked at church. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, we don't kill people, but animals, it's fine. You know, we hunt. That. He was like, really? Well, it just shocked him. I said, yeah, it's just fine. It's cool. And he's like, huh, okay. I said, Bart, let me ask you something, man. I know your wife's Catholic, and she was practicing Catholic. He didn't go, didn't understand it, didn't get anything out of it. He stayed home. He'd been invited to our church several times. The farmer we were working for was a member of our church. So I just asked him, I said, hey, I know you talked to Gary. I know your wife's Catholic. Where are you? Where do you fall in this whole thing about faith and about Jesus and about following God? And he says, confused. A lot of us can probably relate to that, can't we? And there's a whole world out there that can relate to that, because there are so many voices coming at us from so many directions saying this thing can give you confidence or joy or peace or meaning, and everything's saying this is the thing, this is the thing, this is the thing. And we sometimes maybe are paralyzed by a decision, limping between different things that we'll put our confidence in because it just feels so hard to come down on one. What if I make the wrong choice? That's where the nation of Israel was. And Elijah says, how long are you going to do that? Because at some point you have to make a decision. You got to do it now, because the decision will be made either now because you make it, or at the moment that you expire, the decision will be made. You have to make a decision where you will put your confidence. Let's go to verse 22. Then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves, and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire on it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it upon the wood and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire, He is God. And all the people answered, it is well spoken. Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first. For you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it. And they took the bull that was given them, and they prepared it. And they called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar they had made. And at noon Elijah mocked them, saying, cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself. That's funny. Or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is asleep and must be awakened. If your God is the kind of God that's got to take bathroom breaks, you need a different God, right? As they cried aloud, and they cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. The oblation, that's the killing of the bull, letting its blood pour out. That's what that means. So they raved on until that time, but there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. Let's talk about this next group, the prophets of Baal. These are the fools. That's a biblical word for people who reject and deny God's work and calling in their life. We sometimes are a little bit uncomfortable with this idea that people can be in a position where they have so shut God out of their lives that no matter what sign or calling comes to them, no matter what action of God is performed around them, no matter what message they hear, they find some other excuse to reject what God is saying. There's actually 2 books of the Bible dedicated to people like this. The book of 2 Peter, the book of Jude. False prophets that promote false belief systems. And both Peter and Jude make it abundantly clear that these people are at a place in their lives, it doesn't matter who talks to them, God could perform a sign or a wonder or a miracle in front of their face, and they would deny that it was God. We see an example of this in Jesus' ministry, John chapter 12. Jesus is doing all kinds of really awesome things. And then God actually affirms Jesus' ministry from heaven. He speaks. He says, "This is my son, listen to him." And there were some that heard that recognized, whoa, that was a voice. Maybe it's an angel. Something huge happened. They got it. But a lot of the people, they heard the voice that everybody else heard and knew good and well it was a voice. And what did they say? It thundered. But voices don't come from heaven. It's thunder. Right in their presence, a miraculous voice comes out of the heavens. Some of us are like, if God would just speak to me from heaven, I'd believe. No, you wouldn't. Because if you're in a position of rejecting God, doesn't matter what He puts in front of your face, you're going to be like these prophets. You see, at the end of the day, humanity's problem when they reject God is they want a manageable God. They want a God that they can manipulate to control, to get them what they want when they want it. Humanity's issue is that they're uncomfortable with there being a sovereign Lord who is over them, that has the authority to speak into their lives and say, I made you for this reason, therefore, here's how you live. A lot of people don't like that. They want a God that they can tap into like a genie in a bottle and manipulate to do for them what they want when they want the God to do it, whether it be a personal God or some philosophy or any other goal that they're aiming towards. People like to be able to control and manipulate things for their own advantage. That's what these priests were doing. A little background into the Canaanite belief system. Baal, they believed, the reason that this drought had come about was because Baal had descended into the underworld. He was sleeping a sleep of death. And that's why there was a drought. So, to make him come back and bring the rains upon the land, what was necessary was for him to be woken up and brought back into the land of the living so it would rain once again. Hence all the dancing and the screaming and the cutting of themselves and carrying on like crazy people. They're trying to wake their God up. And so Elijah taunts them. He says, call all you want, your God's not waking up, because there's no real God there to be woken up. And this is the sad and dire straits of those who put faith and confidence in anything less than God. You see the extents these people went to. They poured their lifeblood out. A lot of blood, a lot of sweat, a lot of tears to try to manipulate this God to give them the rain that they wanted. When you don't know God, that's where you are stuck. You are stuck at a place in life where you are working with all you got. You are grinding, you are burning the candle at both ends, you are pouring out an awful lot of blood and sweat and tears to get the next promotion, to get the next grade, to get the next degree, so you got a whole lot of letters at the end of the name, to get that next relationship, because in our society we're told the lie, you're not a whole person unless you find that significant other. It's not true. You're a whole person whether you got that person or not. In our culture, half of you and another half, and then you finally are whole. That's not true. God does math different than us. You're a whole person who meets another whole person. You come together and you're another whole person. It's how it works. But we've been bought and told this lie that no, you've got to be in a relationship so you can update your status. And you got to, that's where contentment will be found. Or finding yourself, finding your identity, or your persuasion as far as your sexuality. All that is what will give you your true meaning. And there's people that are literally mutilating themselves to find peace and contentment that they will never find because it is something less than God. If you don't know God, you're going to be hurting, you're going to be crushing yourself, you're going to be giving all the effort you can for nothing, because anything less than God cannot, will not save you. Amen. And that is Elijah's message. The prophet shows up and he speaks this truth. He asks him at the beginning, how long are you going to be wavering between things that will not save you and the one God who can? Let's go ahead, pick up our Bibles and read the next section of Scripture, verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, come near to me. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. And he put the wood in order, and he cut the bull in pieces. He laid it on the wood, and he said, fill 4 jars with water, and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord. Answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And Elijah said to them, seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape. And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. You know, that judgment upon the prophets, it's a type. We'll talk more about a type here in a minute, what a type is. But it's a type, a foreshadowing of the final day of judgment. Throughout history, there's been occasions where God has visited Judgment Day in a specific time and place to show us there is a day of reckoning. When you choose your God, at some day, you've got to wait and see which God is the God that responds by fire. The prophets of Baal responded the wrong way. So at the day of judgment, when they went, there was the great test. They failed the test, and they were put in a place where their God was revealed to be a sham, and so they received judgment for their wickedness. This is a point in time and in history that is showing us that there will be one grand universal day of judgment where all people of all times and all places will stand before God at a place of judgment. And whichever God you choose is going to make all the difference then and after. But Elijah shows himself here to be a prophet, God's ambassador, the representative of God, to speak truth to others' lives about who God is, about what He's doing, and to invite them into God's presence. That's what Elijah is being as a prophet, God's spokesperson and His ambassador. Now, there's a lot of things that we could talk about with Elijah here, but I want to just point out the movement associated with Elijah, because I think there's something incredibly important for us to see here. The way a certain word is used. It's the exact same word that shows up in Hebrew 3 different times, and depending on your translation, a lot of them keep the word the same. Sometimes it changes it just minutely, but we're going to go back and look at 3 verses where the same word is used because it's linking these movements together to teach us something important. First verse we're going to look at is verse 21, 18:21. Go back and look at that. Elijah asks the people, he says to the people, before he asked them, how long will you go limping between the 2 opinions? Before he asked that question, what does it say that he does? Elijah came near to the people. He came near. He met them where they were. Did you catch that? They were confused. They were lost. They were wavering between opinions. They didn't know what step to take next. In the menu of gods, they had no idea what to order. And he took the first step and met them in their brokenness and their confusion. He went to them. He came near to the people. Now look at verse 30. Then Elijah said to all the people, what does he invite them to do? Come near to me. And all the people came near to him. And then he repaired the altar of the Lord. They watched him build back the altar. They watched him in this act of faithful devotion. So he goes to them, then he says, hey, come on, you gotta see something, come after me. There's something you gotta know, something you gotta see. Then he proceeds to act faithfully towards God. Look at verse 36. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near. And he said, O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known that you are God in Israel. In this example, who is it that Elijah is coming near to? It's God. He's approaching God to meet Him in the place of sacrifice. He approaches God to speak to Him. So we see this movement, the representative of God, the prophet, the ambassador of God, meeting people where they are in their confusion and brokenness, saying, come on, follow me, I got to show you something. There's something huge you got to know about. Watch this. And before their very eyes, he faithfully reaches out to his God. They see his acts of faith and devotion. He builds back the altar. He then arranges for the sacrifice, even though the first sacrifice that was attempted by the Baal prophets didn't work. He knows his is going to work, so he builds it. He makes the sacrifice. He arranges everything. And then in an act of deep faith and boldness, he says, flood this thing with water, so much water that it overflows the sacrifice. Now, where did they get water from in a drought? We'll talk about that next week, all right? Right now, just let that ride. But there was water, and he pours it on the sacrifice, and it saturates it, and then he calls out to God in front of the people, God, let it be known that you are God. Wha-boom! God responds in fire. When God's people enter into the broken confusion of the world and invite them, come, you got to see what God's doing, and then they faithfully respond to God before their eyes, God shows up and does awesome things. He did that then, and He does it today. It maybe looks a little bit different. Maybe there won't be a lightning strike that incinerates an altar in front. I hope not. That'd be kind of wild to see. But God is going to show up in a big way and make His presence known when His people faithfully live for Him in the sight of the world. We see in Elijah a type, I told you we're going to come back to this word, a type of Jesus. Now, a type. Just a reminder of what a type is. It is a non-verbal prophecy. We know what a prophecy is. It's when the prophet speaks that something will come to pass, an event or a birth or something's going to happen. He speaks it, and then God does it. A type is a non-verbal prophecy. So an institution or a person or an event or a place that foreshadows something Jesus will do later. There's tons of these all through the Old Testament scriptures. Elijah is a type of Jesus. We see in him a pattern that points to the ministry of Jesus Christ. Consider the movements of Elijah. Elijah goes to the lost. Who else went to the lost? Jesus. In His incarnation, He comes to the broken mess that we all live in. And then when Jesus meets lost people, what does He invite them to do? Come, follow me. And then He brings them to a place where they can see Him faithfully following God. Jesus was faithful in every way, every circumstance. Any test put before Him, He passed because He always remained faithful, even though it cost Him His life. And then Elijah offered a sacrifice that was accepted by God for the benefit of the people. The ultimate sacrificer for the sake of the people is Jesus. There's a fifth thing that's beyond the scope of this morning, but I do want to point it out. That judgment that we talked about, the act of judgment on the false prophets, the day of reckoning, the day of judgment. Jesus is that judge that returns to judge the living and the dead. Elijah exacts justice and judgment also, a type, a foreshadowing about there's one coming down the road, Israel, that's going to do these things, but on a much bigger scale. Elijah points to Jesus through his actions and through his ministry. And what we see then is through Elijah and those of us who are in the same pedigree and line of the prophets, following God, speaking the truth about God, living for God in a broken and confused culture. We've accepted Jesus, the prophet par excellence, the perfect prophet. who enters into brokenness, invites people to come know God, invites people to a place to see Him live faithfully for God, who offers the sacrifice for salvation. That's what we're about. You know the word Christian means little Christ? That's what we're called to be. We reflect not just Elijah in our culture, but more importantly, we reflect Jesus. The way that we have adopted discussing this around here is our mission statement: sharing the gospel, making disciples, loving people. What are we about? What is our goal? Why do we exist as a church? Well, number one, we enter into the brokenness and the fallenness of the world like Jesus did, like Elijah did. They took the first step, so should we. We shouldn't have this big illusion about ourselves that somehow, we're just so awesome. I got a VIP get into heaven card, and that's why I'm able to be at church, because I got it all figured out and I'm perfect. No. We don't consider ourselves as somehow being holier than thou, holy rollers, better than the world. We are honest with the fact that we are sinners saved by grace. That's how we got here. It's how we made it. That's how we're going to get in on the last day. That's how we're going to pass the judgments, because what Jesus did for us. So we should not be audacious and stand back and look at the world and be like, look how messed up they are. We got to take that first step and meet people in their place of brokenness and confusion. And my bet is that most, probably all of us, know somebody that does not have the peace and the meaning and the comfort that is associated with Jesus Christ. That person's in your life for a reason. That takes us on to that next thing that both Elijah and Jesus did. Invite. God is doing big things. Come on, you got to see. Invite them into your life to see Jesus at work with you and in you. Invite them to come to a place where they see Jesus at work. Invite them to church if they're not church-going people. Some of y'all might have come here because you were invited by somebody. You know what that means? It means that somebody really, really cares about you. It means that somebody really, really believes that you knowing Jesus is the most important thing in the world. And they love you enough to say, you got to come and see what Jesus is doing. Come, see God at work. And it could be they're not ready for that. Invite them to a small group. Invite them to your home to have a meal and discussion with them. But inviting them into a place where they can see and experience God at work. And importantly, we are a part of that. Remember, Elijah faithfully did his act of devotion in the sight of the people. Jesus faithfully in the sight of the people honored and obeyed God in everything. It is important, it's critical for the people of God to live faithful lives in the sight of the world. We live different than the rest of the world lives. I would hate to know how many people potentially have been turned off to the message of Christianity because they hear a message, Jesus will change your life. Jesus will give you meaning. Jesus will give you fulfillment and joy and peace. And then their lives look exactly like the world's life. That completely robs the message of any validity. When we say, come know Jesus, but we're still scrapping away, cutting ourselves and carrying on like the rest of the world, running after things less than God. When our love lives look like the world and we're not practicing purity the way that Christ intends, we're pointing the world away from Jesus. When we live in a life pattern that is full of rage or wrath or drunkenness or cutting people down or cheating on our taxes or belittling people, when our life pattern does not reflect the faith we say we have, we are just adding to the confusion. And so it is critical that God's people live in a way that shows their faithfulness to God. For our sake, yes, because then we know our God better. We draw closer to Him as we live for Him. But there's a missionary aspect to this too. We cannot effectively share the message of Jesus when we're not looking like Jesus at all. Elijah and Jesus both show us how critically important it is for us to live faithful lives that honor the God that we claim to worship. Our lives always, constantly, in every way point to Jesus Christ. Here's the challenge for us. If you're already a follower of Jesus Christ, we got to continually gut check, ask ourselves, wrestle with this. Let the Spirit draw out of us the things in our life where we're not reflecting Jesus well. Maybe we are kind of between two opinions and we say, yeah, I follow Jesus, but all of our money, all of our time, all of our effort, all of our energy is all poured into other things. And we maybe need to be honest about, look, there's some prioritization that needs to take place in my life. There are things that I'm putting way out here that at the end, if I'm honest, they're not a big deal. They're less than God. They can never save me. And here's the thing that God wants us to know. Anything less than Him will fail at some point. It will fail. And if we're Christians professing Jesus and we're trying to bring the world to know Jesus, if Jesus can't be seen in us, that's a big problem. This doesn't mean perfection, though. We got to understand that. We struggle, we mess up. This means then we got to be honest with our struggles. We don't pretend like, I'm perfect and listen to what I say. No, we're not here again, remember, not because we're perfect, because He's perfect. That's why we're here. And so we're honest with our shortcomings and say, listen, I'm a sinner saved by grace. I'm trying, but when we fail, we got to be candid and honest and open about that. I'm like, listen, I messed up, I'm sorry, and point to Jesus. We've used this phrase a lot. It's one of my favorite ones, but it's worth saying over and over again. The church of Jesus Christ is not a country club for saints. It's a hospital for sinners. It could be, though, that there's somebody here that does not know Jesus Christ. Maybe you have not made that official decision to make Him your God. You have not bent the knee to King Jesus and accepted, He is the only way for me to be saved. This story in the Bible invites us to contrast our God with every other false, little g false God that exists. All of the other gods of the world will demand everything from you. You will work. You will bleed, you will sweat, you will cry. You will just have all kinds of effort and energy to try to form some kind of purpose and joy, some sense of fulfillment. And what you find is that with each thing you succeed in, each thing you cling to that you think will give you hope, it always kind of just fades and falls. Jesus, though, shows us the actual heart of God. You know what the key indicator here is? Baal and every false god like him demands everything from you and will run you into the ground and will demand your life, your blood, sweat, and tears. But God, the real God, He reveals His heart in us, to us in this way. It's the opposite. You see, He went through the suffering of blood, sweat, and tears for you so that you don't have to. That's the beauty of it. And that's what makes it so obvious when something is a lie from Satan. Anything that reverses that and demands everything from you on your end to claw your way back to God, to do whatever you can to forge some meaning and life for yourself, we know it's from the devil who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But the true God shows up and He tells us at the end there's only one living God, one who responds from heaven in a powerful way. And that is the God that was willing for you, for me, to go through that blood, sweat, and tears so that we could be made whole with God. If you're tired of putting trust in things that are less than, that are just going to disappoint over and over again, I encourage you to come and make a decision to put your hope in the living God who never sleeps, never rests, but is always attentive to the needs and cares of His people. He sent Jesus for you so that you could be with Him forever. And if you have not come and accepted what Christ has done for you, now's your time to do that.